Wolves of Kaer Morhen, the lore of the School of the Wolf. In the mist-shrouded valleys of the northern kingdoms, where moonlight dances upon the dark forest floor, there once stood a fortress unlike any other. The voice glides softly, just above a whisper, through the silent night, stirring curiosity. The air hums with ancient secrets, and as you drift deeper, the tale of the School of the Wolf unfolds. Chapter 1. Founding Shadows. Before Kaer Morhen had a name, before its stones bore claw marks and the wind carried the scent of old blood, there were only stories, half-remembered, part prophecy, part fear. The continent was young in strife, but old in chaos. Monsters, born from the conjunction of the spheres, still prowled freely in wild lands. Humans, recent arrivals to this turbulent world, had not yet mastered the arcane arts, nor the blade with which to tame it. They were prey, more often than predator. And so it was that in the highlands of Kaedwen, amidst glacial valleys and evergreen shadow, the first of the Witchers began to gather. Not by decree, nor by coin, but by necessity. They came as scattered hunters, mages disillusioned by the brotherhood, warriors broken by war, orphans who survived where no others did. The first among them was Leupold White, though his true name has long since vanished beneath legend. Leupold was not a king, nor was he noble, but he had two things that others lacked: vision and memory. He remembered every scream he'd heard echoing from a forest path, every village child taken by drowners, every claw mark left behind by a beast no scholar could name. And in restless dreams he heard the howling of wolves, always wolves, circling his soul. He built nothing at first, only walked, for weeks, then months, until he reached a cliffside in Kaedwen, looking down upon a valley so thick with mist it seemed to breathe. The locals called it Umbra Hollow, the Hollow of Shadows. They said elves once hid there, that their bones still stirred. They said the valley had no floor, only teeth. Leupold disagreed. He said, "Here we build." With coin earned from a griffin's bounty and labor drawn from outcasts, Leupold laid the first stone. It would take 10 winters for the foundation to hold, 10 more before it could be called a keep. What they built became known as Kaer Morhen, the Keep of the Elder Sea in Elder speech, an old ruin reshaped by young minds. But it was not just stone and mortar that defined it. It was what happened inside. No story of the School of the Wolf begins without the trials. Early experiments were tragic. Mages attempting to craft warriors through alchemy and magic found more death than success. Children brought to the keep either perished or emerged twisted, minds broken, bodies warped. Yet Leupold insisted, "We do not curse these boys, we unchain them." A sympathetic mage, Elric of Ban-Ard, refined the process over the years. He learned how to modulate mutagens, stabilize reactions, and build resistances. From him came the trial of grasses, a process so painful only 3 in 10 survived. But those who did became faster, stronger, near immune to disease, their senses sharpened to unnatural degrees. These were not simply warriors, they were witchers. Other trials followed, the trial of dreams where illusory fears tested a boy's psyche, the trial of mountains where candidates were left alone in snow-drowned peaks for a week with no gear but a knife. Those who passed all three were gifted silver and steel, and most importantly, they received the Wolf Medallion, forged by Leupold himself, each one bearing a shard of elder crystal humming softly near magic. Unlike other orders, the wolves were not bound to kings. Leupold drafted the first code, not a law, but a creed. It read, "Where men turn away, we walk. Where monsters feed, we strike. Where payment is just, we serve. Where oaths break, we remain." Wolves were taught neutrality, not cruelty, efficiency, not indifference, but above all, choice. A witcher who killed for sport was exiled. A witcher who betrayed coin was branded. But a witcher who doubted was allowed. They were not an army. They were a pack. The early contracts were brutal. A kimono in Lower Temeria. A Latian feeding on the bones of an Edenian hamlet. A possessed baron in Mahakam. Many died, but stories spread faster than funerals. Villages that once cursed the keep began to send offerings. Parents began to whisper about the wolves in awe, not horror. Not because they were liked, but because they were needed. By the 20th year, the school had grown. A new wing was added for younglings. The forges worked year-round. Mages came, not to dominate, but to learn. Astronomers mapped stars from the keep's tower. Alchemists brewed potions never seen before. And in the library, Leupold placed one last thing. A book bound in wolfskin, untouched by magic, inked only in blood and ash. On its first page he wrote, "They will not remember us kindly. Let them remember us truthfully." Chapter 2. Rise of the White Wolves. The cold stone walls of Kaer Morhen echoed with life. Not the laughter of children or the music of feasts, but the sharp clash of steel, the crackling hiss of alchemical flames, and the quiet, determined footsteps of those who had chosen, or had been chosen, to walk a path few could endure. By the third generation of witchers, trained in the fortress, the school of the wolf was no longer a scattered brotherhood of survivors. It was an institution, dreaded, respected, and cloaked in mystery. With Leupold White's teachings now codified and expanded, the school had matured into a well-oiled crucible of transformation. Those who passed its gates were rarely seen again until they returned bearing coin, contracts, and blood on their cloaks. What had begun as a desperate measure had become a tradition, dark, violent, but necessary. The rise of the White Wolves was marked by the emergence of legendary figures, witchers whose names would be whispered across taverns and royal courts alike. Valen the Grey was one such man. He was known as the Beast Tongue, for he claimed he could speak to monsters. And though most dismissed it as myth, those who fought beside him swore he could stand motionless before a chort, whisper in an unknown tongue, and the creature would retreat. Valen rarely spoke otherwise. His medallion was always warm, as though reacting not only to magic, but to the unseen will of nature itself. Some believed he had never fully returned from the trial of dreams. Then there was Marwen the Flame-Eyed, who lost both eyes to a cockatrice, yet returned to Kaer Morhen, guided only by her instincts and a young raven. She drank a prototype elixir, known only as sightless, and after months of screaming agony, she emerged, changed. Her eye sockets glowed faintly with alchemical fire, and she could see heat, motion, even lies. It was said that no man, beast, or demon could deceive her. These legends were not isolated. In these decades, Kaer Morhen became a forge not only of steel, but of identity. Each Witcher emerged as more than a killer. They were symbols, walking myths draped in cloak and silence. They were no longer merely soldiers of necessity, but spiritual successors to something far older, the primal guardians of the balance between man and beast. As the school grew, so too did its customs. The trial of the grasses remained, still claiming more lives than it spared. But now, each boy or girl who survived the ordeal was granted a naming ceremony. In the moonlit central hall, under the gaze of carved wolves and ancient glyphs, a name was chosen, not one given at birth, but one earned in fire, ice, and blood. Some Witchers chose names that reflected their trauma, others their aspirations. A few let the old masters name them. The ceremony was not loud, nor was it joyful. It was solemn, quiet, and terribly beautiful. Another custom was the silence of the first year. After surviving the trials, no initiate was allowed to speak for an entire year. This was not a punishment, but a rite of introspection. It was said that only in silence could a Witcher learn the true sounds of the world, the wind over fur, the breath of a predator, the tremble in a liar's throat. And at the end of that year, each Witcher spoke a single phrase of their choosing, to be recorded in the Book of Breath. It was kept locked in a chamber behind the library, inscribed only with the voices of those who had once been mute. Their words were read only by the Grand Master, and only in the moments before death or war. The school's fame came at a cost. Monarchs began to take notice. Some sought to ally with the wolves, offering gold, lands, or royal titles. But the Witchers refused them all. They would not swear oaths to thrones. Their loyalty, as always, was to the contract and the code. This refusal angered many. Edirne's king Medvar the Stern declared the wolves unnatural mercenaries. In Redania, whispers began that Kaer Morhen harbored warlocks. Even in Cadwyn, tensions grew. The wolves had always been tolerated, but now they were feared not only as mutants, but as power brokers outside the rule of crowns. The Brotherhood of Sorcerers, too, watched with unease. While some individual mages worked with the wolves in good faith, the council worried that the Witcher's grasp of mutagens and magic, practical, effective, and entirely outside the formal academic structure, threatened the arcane hierarchy. In secret, the council attempted to place a spy inside Kaer Morhen, a young mage named Selrin, gifted in illusion and diplomacy. He lasted a week. Not because he was discovered, but because after witnessing a trial, he fled in horror and never spoke of it again. The final affirmation of the wolves' independence came with what historians later called the Battle of the Broken Antler. A Nilfgaardian noble hired a group of mercenaries and mages to seize control of a pass in the Blue Mountains, a pass protected by a small Kaer Morhen outpost. Rather than retreat, 5 Witchers held the pass for 7 days against 70 men. They used not just swords, but runes, potions, and terrain. On the 7th day, reinforcements from the school arrived, led by Marwen herself. They left no survivors. The Witchers did not loot the corpses. They burned them, marked the site with a cairn of broken antlers, and left without a word. When news spread, public opinion changed, not entirely to admiration, but to caution. The message was clear. The school of the wolf was not a kingdom, but neither could it be ruled.
By the end of the century, Kaer Morhen had trained over 300 witchers. Not all survived, but their impact reshaped the balance between monsters, magic, and mankind. Children played with carved wolf medallions. Merchants hired witchers as guards of last resort. Even bards began composing songs, not about their heroism, but about their tragedy. For the wolves, this was enough. They did not need statues. They needed silver, steel, and the silence of snow. The rise had come. But as every wolf knows, after the hunt comes the long, dark winter. Winter came hard one year, too hard. A plague swept through Kedwin, claiming not only peasants but sorcerers and scribes. One of Kaer Morhen's own herbalists brought it unknowingly through the gates. Within 2 weeks, 9 witchers fell sick. 6 died. The loss was devastating, not merely in numbers, but in morale. One of the fallen was Master Armund, a survivor of the first trials and instructor of the Blade Hall. His loss left a silence deeper than the snow. Then came the year of screaming moons, when monsters, once thought extinct, returned in great numbers. Fiends, higher vampires, even a slizzard seen near Vengerberg. Some whispered that a new conjunction was coming. Others believed the veil between spheres had weakened. The school responded as it always had, by sending its best. But the world was changing. Kings no longer paid promptly. In some regions, witchers were hunted outright. Elves called them abominations. Dwarves accused them of hoarding ancient relics. And humans simply stopped trusting them. The final fracture came from a mage, Torin Vale, once a respected instructor, known for his insight into the alchemical properties of wyvern glands. But Vale grew obsessive. He believed the trials were flawed, wasteful. He began experimenting on his own, trying to create witchers without pain, without death. He succeeded, briefly. One boy, Joran, emerged faster, sharper, even more resistant than any before him. But something was missing. Emotion, morality, restraint. Whatever thin strand tied witchers to humanity had been severed. Joran escaped before he could be contained. He slew 2 stable hands, a fellow initiate, and disappeared into the forests. Some say he became a beast himself. Others claim he returned to Vale, and together they built something darker. Vale was banished, though some argued for his execution. But the damage had been done. Trust within the school faltered. For the first time, the medallion of the wolf was associated with fear not of monsters, but of men. By the 4th century after its founding, Kaer Morhen stood quiet more often than not. Its halls, once filled with echoing footsteps and clanging steel, became still. Banners grew dusty. Forges cooled. Only a few witchers remained to train the next generation, those stubborn or loyal enough not to leave. Among them was old Mar, the last of the second circle. He trained what he called the last litter, 6 boys and 1 girl, all survivors of the trials. He taught them not only the blade, but history. Chapter 4. The Fall of Kaer Morhen. There was no thunder the night Kaer Morhen fell. No omens in the sky, no red moons, no screaming banshees over the battlements. Only snow, quiet, endless, and the wind sighing through broken windows. The fortress had stood for centuries. It had endured war, famine, exile, and betrayal. But it would not endure this. The details remain clouded even now, shrouded in conflicting accounts, burned letters, and long dead voices. But certain facts remain, enough to trace the silhouette of the final days of the School of the Wolf. It began with silence. The last generation of witchers trained within Kaer Morhen numbered no more than a dozen. Most were scattered across the continent, hunting for coin or purpose. Only 4 remained within the keep that winter. Their names were Varin, Auric, Ilya, and the youngest, Naina. Old Mar, their mentor, had passed quietly the previous spring, his ashes scattered on the frozen cliffs overlooking Umbra Hollow. With his death, the line of elder masters was broken. The keep had become a mausoleum of memory, empty halls filled with echoes, training grounds covered in frost, libraries whose books grew mold before new hands could open them. Still they trained, they hunted, they waited, until the mountain trembled. It came not from kings or monsters, but from men, a coalition of nobles, minor sorcerers, and armed retinues, bound by fear, superstition, and ambition, descended upon Kaer Morhen in the final days of winter. Some sought to seize ancient knowledge. Others demanded the end of the so-called mutations. A few simply wished to erase what they did not understand. The Witchers did not surrender. They knew the keep's defenses better than any outsider. Runes were carved into walls, trapdoors hid armories, escape tunnels, and volatile alchemical stores. Snow concealed steel. The wolves prepared not for survival, but for legend. For 3 days they held the walls. Auric died the first night, setting fire to the eastern gate as siege engines approached. Ilya was lost during a sortie, taking 5 enemies with her before vanishing into the woods. Her medallion was found later, still humming. Varin and Naina fought together until the final breach. They stood in the library, surrounded by flames, protecting the Book of Breath. When the attackers broke through, they found only silence, no resistance, no victory. Only ashes, cinders, and the fading scent of wolfbane. The fortress was razed. The attackers, satisfied or disillusioned, scattered. None remained to preserve what they had destroyed. No victors, only ghosts. But Kaer Morhen did not die that day. Not truly. Some say Naina escaped, carrying the Book of Breath hidden in her cloak. Others claim Ilya still lives in the mountains, hunting alone, bound to a vow of silence. A boy in Toussaint once described a one-eyed woman who killed a bruxa with no words, then vanished before dawn. He said she wore a medallion shaped like a wolf. Years passed, then decades. The ruins of Kaer Morhen were lost beneath ice and time. Only the bravest or most foolish dared climb the path to Umbra Hollow. Sometimes they returned with nothing. Sometimes they did not return at all. But some heard things, a howl, distant but close. Footsteps on stone, the clash of swords in an empty courtyard. And sometimes, in dreams, those who sleep near the mountains speak of eyes like amber fire,
watching through the snow. The wolves were gone, but they were never truly gone, because every time a child wakes from nightmares, every time a village buries its dead with claw marks on their chest, someone whispers, "Where men turn away, the wolf still walks." Chapter 5. Echoes in the Snow. The snows of Kedwin bury many things: footprints, bones, voices, but some echoes do not fade. They linger in the frost, in the howl of distant wolves, in the quiet places where once swords clashed and alchemy boiled. After Kaer Morhen fell, the world did not forget the School of the Wolf. It remembered in stories, in symbols, and in those few who survived the end. Some say the Witchers were scattered like ashes on the wind. Others claim they went underground, hiding in caves or ruins, waiting for a world that no longer feared them. The truth, as always, is more complicated. Naina, the youngest of the last defenders, was seen once more in the wilds of Lyria, years after the siege. A merchant caravan was attacked by a grave hag in the northern woodlands. All but one were killed, a boy of 12 left unharmed. He told his rescuers of a silver-haired woman with a sword longer than she was tall. She spoke no words. She wore a wolf medallion. Her eyes were yellow. From that day on, stories of the silent wolf spread across the northern kingdoms. Some believed Naina was hunting monsters. Others whispered she hunted the men who destroyed Kaer Morhen. A few even believed she had become something more than a witcher, something older, colder, bound to the land itself. Another survivor, Varen, was found in the service of a Nilfgaardian scholar decades later. Disguised as a mercenary, he protected expeditions into the Korath Desert. When asked if he had ever belonged to a witcher school, he only replied, "I belonged to a brotherhood. It died. I did not." He carried no medallion, but his blade was silvered, and he still brewed his own elixirs. When he died of fever, the scholar noted that Varen's blood turned black when exposed to sunlight, a trait of heavily mutated witchers. The girl Ilya, presumed dead during the siege, became legend in her own right. In Skellige, sailors tell of a woman who leaps between ships during storms, slaying drowners and sirens alike, vanishing before coin can be offered. In Oxenfurt, an anonymous author published a book titled Steel and Silence, detailing the emotional life of a lone witcher. The narrator bore no name, but her memories matched Kaer Morhen's halls too closely for coincidence. And what of the others? Some likely perished. Some may have discarded their medallions and faded into anonymity. But the world they had shaped could not so easily forget them. Kaer Morhen was gone, but the knowledge it held could not be fully erased. Alchemical texts, combat scrolls, and monster bestiaries had been copied, some by the witches themselves, some stolen or sold over time. These writings passed from hand to hand. Hedge mages, scholars, even sorceresses who had once scorned the witchers now studied their work. One such scroll, the Codex Lupus, surfaced in Bonnard's arcane library a century later. It detailed not only combat techniques, but meditative practices taught at Kaer Morhen, methods of controlling emotion, channeling instincts, quieting pain. Students began to adapt these methods for magical focus. Ironically, the very school of sorcery that had once feared the wolves now learned from them. In Mahakam, a dwarf named Borgrim Stonefist claimed to have reforged a wolf medallion from fragments found in the Blue Mountains. He wore it as a pendant, saying it brought him luck in tunnels where normal men were driven mad. He was not a witcher,
but he understood what it symbolized: resilience in darkness. Some warriors, even those unmutated, took to wearing wolf symbols in homage. Not to pretend they were witchers, but to remember those who had walked into shadow for coin and cause alike. Time erodes all things, but stories persist. In the borderlands between Redania and Kedwen, a new keep was rumored to be under construction. Built not from stone, but from timber and steel, hidden in the folds of a mountain range unnamed on any map. It was said to be led by a woman with eyes like molten gold and a voice that hadn't spoken in years. Some say it is a new school. Others claim it is only a safe haven, a place where the children of monsters and men might find balance. Whether it is truth or legend, only one thing is certain: the medallion still hums. In a ruined chapel not far from the Yaruga, etched into a wall of moss-stained stone, there is a verse: "We were never heroes. We were never saints. We were knives in the dark and shields in silence. We did not ask for glory. We asked for purpose." Beneath it, carved deep in claw-like script, is a single word: wolves. And somewhere, on a cold wind that drifts across the snows of Kedwen, the howl rises once more. Not in mourning, but in remembrance. Chapter 6. What makes a witcher? They say a witcher has no emotions, but they are wrong. It is not the absence of feeling that defines a witcher, but the discipline to contain it, to set grief aside until the monster is slain, to look into the eyes of suffering and not flinch, to walk into fire not because it brings glory, but because someone must. A witcher is forged, not born, tempered in trials, twisted by toxins, bound to code and coin. But within that scarred frame, behind the yellow eyes and quiet voice, is something deeply, stubbornly human. And something more. They were not made to be knights, not bred for banners or fanfare. Their work was never clean, never kind. They were summoned when others failed, when swords shattered, when spells faltered, when villages whispered of things too old for prayer. They walked where priests would not, where kings dared not send armies. They entered dens of rot and claw, salt and scream, and returned carrying only silence. And when the work was done, when the beast lay still and the contract paid, they did not linger. They did not boast. They did not dine at the Lord's table. They vanished into the dusk. That was their way. But what makes a witcher truly? Is it the trials, the poisons that twist the body, the rituals that strip away fear? Is it the medallion, the symbol of their school, vibrating with unseen danger? Is it the steel and silver, the blade in one hand and signs in the other? Perhaps. But perhaps it is something else. A witcher is born the moment he, or she, chooses the path not for vengeance, nor glory, nor hatred of monsters, but from duty, from the quiet, awful understanding that the world is cruel, and someone must stand between the innocent and the dark. They are monsters to some, abominations, mutants. But they are also mirrors, showing mankind what it dares not admit, that the greatest evils do not crawl from swamps or forests, but from men's hearts. Witchers did not slay for pleasure. They did not rule. They did not take sides in thrones and wars unless the coin demanded it. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, they refused that coin. When a creature begged, when a curse was unjust, when the monster was the man. No code demanded that. No contract compelled it. That was choice. And it is in that choice that we find the truth. Even as Kaer Morhen fell, even as the walls crumbled and the fires dimmed, the Witchers did not vanish, not truly. They walked the world still, hidden, aged, forgotten, but not gone. They remained in gesture, in the sword raised against injustice, in the defense of those who could not defend themselves. They remained in memory, in stories told by firelight, in medallions passed from hand to hand, in books once banned, now studied in schools of magic and war alike. They remained in spirit, in those who dare walk alone, in silence, toward danger. The Witcher is not a man, not a woman, not a mutant. The Witcher is a myth made flesh, a scarred answer to the question, who will protect us when gods turn away? Somewhere in the wilds, a child finds a worn, cracked medallion in the roots of a gnarled tree. He does not know its name, only that it hums in his hand, warm and waiting. Somewhere on the path, an old Witcher sharpens his blade, not because he must, but because the ritual gives him peace. Somewhere in a ruined chapel, someone lights a candle beneath the old verse, not as worship, not as mourning, but as remembrance. We were never heroes, we were never saints. We were knives in the dark and shields in silence. We did not ask for glory, we asked for purpose. Somewhere, in snow and fog and fading twilight, a howl rises, low and long, carried not by a wolf, but by memory. And that memory is not mournful, it is proud, it is eternal, it is Witcher.